All right, Tom. So
Yes.
what do you think of Elon Musk?
No. You wanted to talk about Elon Musk, so you go ahead.
Oh fuck, I have to say something about Elon Musk now? Well, before I talk about Elon Musk, I want to talk about the nature of this podcast because I was thinking about it. Because
Yeah,
we recently did something about Sapolsky
yeah.
and we were a little bit nasty about Sapolsky. Like we said a
No.
lot of, you know, sort of
True things.
maybe true things. We were maybe a bit, kind of assholes a bit about Sapolsky because maybe you disagree, but he's a great guy and he does great things. But and then we got some negative comments. The video went like slightly viral. We got some negative comments, um, and the negative comments were like, "We're straw manning Sapolsky," and yes, we're straw manning Sapolsky because what we're doing here is as much comedy and as it is a serious analysis because I think that people are really intensely serious at the moment, and some really good, stupid, you know, play is warranted. So that's kind of like how I kind of approach this podcast. So I don't know about you, but so I don't feel that what I say about Sapolsky is something that somebody should take entirely seriously. Even if there are some serious points in there.
Yeah, I love that because I feel there is a place for honesty and and seriousness and deep philosophical debate, and there's certainly a place for this, but there also has to be a place for play, because you have to try out new things, you have to try out new ideas, and you just have the freedom to walk the line between exploration and comedy and nastiness and all of this, just to find some new takes, some new perspectives, even if they're
Yeah,
shitty. And I think, this podcast, this Parallax View, was never, about deep philosophical exploration. It was first and foremost to have fun and to play with ideas and to find patterns and to, and so I'm completely with you there. Mm.
yeah. And sometimes we fall into deep exploration, which is kind of interesting. Like it's less of a it's more like how the Beatles make music, right? They just bang on a few things, they fool around, they turn things upside down, and then maybe they come up with some interesting kind of arrangement which they find you know interesting or pleasurable, and then they add, they kind of build a melody around that. So or jazz or something like that. Jazz, it's not about being in tune all the time. It's not about being right or being having some sort of ultimate perspective or it's more like a playful exploration where you turn things on their head. So,
Well,
so
I
anyway,
mean,
so I don't mind the bad comments, that we were strawmanning Sapolsky, and I don't even disagree. Well, I don't even disagree with criticisms against some of the things I say because I don't stand behind them 100% as some ultimate truth. I'm trying to make music with words.
well, I think, in regard of our podcast with Sapolsky, there was, you could take it as straw manning, but I don't think that was necessarily the case because, okay, it was not a philosophical exploration, but, the argument, one of the arguments that I made, I think are still true. It's like you can't have one concept and one perspective or one frame of world without its opposite or the other. So you have emptiness, you have form, you have determinism. That means necessarily by way of concept, you have non-determinism. If you have non-determinism, you have free will, basically. So you can't, this is a philosophical argument. You can't have one without the other.
Right,
Right. And so
right.
and so that is not necessarily straw manning. This is an idea that is basically the counter offer to people like Sapolsky that propose that there is no free will. There is a free will because it's a way of constructing arguments in the first place?
There's a
How do
free
you
will
do that?
because of determinism. Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Because because of emptiness, there's form. Because of yes, there's a no. Because of white, there's black. That's you can't break this kind of thing, because determinism only makes sense in context of non-determinism, right? This
Yeah,
is
yeah, got you.
very simple, and
Sure.
this is like and so this is why philosophy kind of supersedes a materialistic scientific view of the world, because science, as valuable as it is, runs on a certain code, and you have to code switch at some time to see what it is all about. So I don't necessarily think that we're strawmanning him, and I also think that he's kind of reincarnation of Abraham, because the myth is that Abraham is going on the mountain on the behest of God in order to kill his son, and he was supposed to do it, and this is a deterministic view, and God was like, what the fuck are you doing? You are free, and Abraham was like, really? No,
Oh,
I
I
don't
think
get
that's
it.
great. Yeah, yeah. I think
No,
that's a
and so
great
it's not
analysis.
necessary. No, it's not. No, it's not straw manning. It's just an observation,
Sure.
right?
Okay, that's perfectly valid. Maybe it was me who was straw manning. In the sense you had a good philosophical argument. I was straw manning. Perhaps I am the one who was straw manning because I didn't adequately feel like I knew his work enough to make a proper critique. So I was just kind of going along with it. Um, I was just playing around with this idea that there's the free will and the non-free will. So I get your argument and I agree. One of the things I thought that was perhaps off was, like people always say, oh yeah, he's over, he's finished, he's he was big, in the past and now he's nobody, and
Yeah,
they do the same about Jordan Peterson and everybody. It's like, oh yeah, it's like this is a kind of a cheap, that's a bit of a cheap critique, right? In the
right.
sense that you know these people are still the same people they've always been. And whether they're relevant now and whether they aren't, I feel that people who are relevant remain relevant even if other people don't notice what they're doing. Like for example, like David Bowie, even though his music wasn't popular, a lot of his music was probably very interesting, and we just didn't. It wasn't hitting the mainstream, but it was probably very interesting. So anyway, I'm critiquing like the pop culture type of critique, which is always about what is on or what is off.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah. I mean, sure, but again, it's like there's a academic way to do critique, and there are podcasts for this. But the parallax view was never intended to be an academic review of philosophical ideas and discourse. It was always a playful walking between the lines of philosophy, psychology, spirituality, a little bit of pop culture critique and sociology, all of these kind of things meshed together, which is just what it is, and what's interesting to me to find where these different things come together, you
Mm-hmm,
know
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and so that we can talk about philosophical ideas, and then we ask, so what is relationship between Leary and Peterson, for example, which is like, it's actually a non-topic, but it's interesting to play with these ideas, that what we did. And so I like
Mm-hmm.
this,
Yeah.
and
So I have one question for you, Tom. What do you think of Elon Musk?
well, maybe we come to this later, because I feel that we're more closely to the topic of trigonometry here than to Elon
Uh,
Musk.
okay,
If
go ahead.
Because I was thinking, these guys, completely blew up. I mean, they started the podcast 2018,
Hmm.
and became like hugely successful, right? Hugely successful.
Yeah.
And I always had like this kind of impression that I'm coming to the point that they're kind of two nerds. But if you actually listen to this Konstantin Kreisen kind of guy who does like this also like speeches, very articulate, very sophisticated people, that are
Hmm.
behind this podcast. But what's interesting is that, there's this thing that the higher you get in the hierarchy of, of status and fame and success, the more conformist is the view that you kind of espouse, or that you have. And the kind of, uh, there's a playfulness getting lost,
Hmm.
the higher you get into these kinds of strata, to the fact that, these trigonometry guys completely cater to a right of center leaning audience, like completely, as you noticed before, like completely on the line with Peterson and Peugeot and Sam Harris and
Oh, I can bring Elon Musk back in here too, because
go, you like to
what
talk
he
about.
said, no, no, what he said about Twitter was kind of
Yeah,
interesting. He said Twitter was completely run by, the quote unquote deep state, right? The people who, who the Democrats, let's
yeah.
say, wealthy Democrats, and also the far left in San Francisco. Um, the people, this is what he said. I don't know if it's true or not, but he said that, the far left was running Twitter. And Twitter has such a profound effect on the world, right? And how people see things, that the society moves with Twitter. It's very interesting. And his point was that they were sort of dictating, kind of like they were this mind virus. Mhm. Deep state mind virus, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so he bought Twitter because he said that he thought that this was a extinctionist perspective, like it was leading towards the apocalypse. Like the people on the streets in San Francisco, like San Francisco used to be a beautiful city, and now it's kind of a dump. And he said that if you go to the streets of San Francisco, you look at, there's so many homeless people. It's so post-apocalyptic, and there's such a huge gap between the rich guys and the poor guys. It's an apocalyptic landscape, and he believes sort of like the Twitter ethos created this apocalyptic landscape. And he bought Twitter because he wanted to sort of, change that discourse. And he said the discourse has moved to the right, but he said that that's because the discourse was on the far left. So anything right of the far left is now on the right. So there isn't really a right and a left. There's just everything that's right of the far left, sort of thing. That was kind of his discourse. So I guess these trigonometry guys, kind of fit into that sort of in the middle, but actually they're considered the right because the left has got so extreme. And that the new Twitter has kind of moved to the right, but it hasn't really moved to the right. It's more like it's moved to the center, but it appears to be moved to the right because the left is so batshit crazy. That makes sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, sure. I mean, what I found interesting is by way of YouTube's algorithm, I was there was a video recommended to me from Christopher Hitchens from, I think, 1994, and there was like with Naomi Wolf and two other women. He was at Charlie Rose, the show,
Mm-hmm.
and with the topic of feminism. And interestingly, they were exactly the same talking points that we have still today. It's like there's nothing new. And it's like it's the same culture. What's the same narrative as, yeah, the hard left went crazy, and that's why the young men don't like to have issues connecting with the world and are kind of insulated and everything. There's the same discourse that we have now, and it's like, which kind of defines our culture, was already happening in 94. And that's what I found very interesting. So it's like an ongoing
Mm.
thing that is not new, but kind of highlighted and exaggerated by Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. And so it's like, and so,
Intensified, yeah. So maybe the
yeah,
seeds of it were there, but well, maybe it is an illusion that all this stuff is new. That's an interesting idea. Like, oh, this is happening. Oh my God, right? All of these things are in the culture where supposed to. People are becoming horribly corrupt, um, and maybe that's sort of an illusion. Maybe all that was going on and what was always going on, and people were always uptight about it and worried about it, and You
Yeah, I
know?
mean, maybe they're like two egregores or two ghouls that kind of hold our society in their grips, and for decades now. And so that's what I mean. It's like when you look at, sorry to come back, but the trigonometry guys, they're kind of ushered into one egregore.
Yeah,
There's no playful interaction with these big topics anymore. It's like it's weird because it's mainstream now, but for me still the interesting things still happen in at the margin, at the outskirts, at the avant-garde kind of, and and
yeah. Well, did you see the new video of Jordan Peterson? This like music video he created.
no, I didn't.
It was like he created this sort of.
It's about crying.
It was pretty good. It was a pretty good. Let's say it was a good political video. And it was him. It was him pretending to be kind of a loser and sitting in front of the TV and eating pizza and in a messy room, and he was like complaining about Judith Butler, and then all the usual suspects come in. All of his friends basically come in, and they're part of the video, and kind of a critique of the usual critique of postmodernism, but it's just the same critique again and again and again and again. So it does feel like an egregore. It feels like where is the what's creative that's going on here? I've heard this already a million times. Like what's the next critique? I mean, it's fine. It's a lot of it is the critique of Judith Butler is pretty obvious by now. It's like it feels to me pretty obvious. But also, it bothers me that I feel like it bothers me that these egregores, that I'm also possessed by these egregores, that I'm also swayed and moved by these egregores, and of course we are, right? Like I remember that during the Trump election, most of my views were pretty sort of banal, lefty type of views, and then the Trump election came along, and then Jordan Peterson came along, all these people came along, and I was sort of swept a bit to the right. And I was like, I question that. I was like, okay, am I like where, like, did I even come up with that, or is this just sort of mind viruses being planted into my head, and
Yeah, I mean,
and then now sometimes I have kind of conservative right wing knee jerk reactions to things that I never used to have. Used to be the opposite. It used to be like that used to be what repulsed me the most. And I think it's just from the media that's being channeled into my brain,
I mean, we're all at times, ideologically possessed because we need to learn something, but I mean, no man is an island, and so we're kind of connected to everything. And the initial message of Peterson, and so that that was interesting. But what you said is that or at least what the critique is, that there's just like this black and white thinking, postmodernity is good or it's bad. And I think it's like, no, it's more than that. There are essential values in postmodernity and postmodernism that are worth protecting.
It's funny you said essential values that are worth protecting, which is sort of the opposite of what postmodernism is supposed to be. It's supposed to be de-essentializing everything. But you said there's essential postmodern values that need to be protected.
Yeah, well,
no, it's just a kind of a strange way. Like it's interesting kind of paradox there.
Yeah, but I mean, you could see certain movements in arts and the civil rights movement and deconstructing systems theory. These are all kind of things you have to contend with, and they're kind of a global kind of approach to thinking, and a global understanding of what's happening with culture and with spirituality, and all of these things are worth considering. It's not just the boogeyman. And so I in these kind of dialogues, I have the feeling the one side is straw manning postmodernism, and the other the lefties are kind of straw manning right wing Petersonian kind of IDW ideas. And it's like, maybe all of these things are true at the same time, and you should be able to what did Marcus Aurelius say? Check everything and keep the best. and so it's like
Yeah.
there are things, and then you start to hold them together.
But on the other hand, we do have to do the critique of Judith Butler when this kind of crazy thinking comes along, right?
Yeah, sure. I
Like
mean,
just stupid, crazy thinking, which has the veneer of pseudo sophistication, which the right wing people are pretty good at attacking, and I think Triggernometry is pretty good at attacking that, and GadSat is pretty good at attacking that, and these guys are pretty good at going after the silliness of the left. But as you say, there's um, it tends to be just tends to be repetition of the same tropes over and over and over again. There's like not much thinking going on anymore.
I mean, and that's what, if you see actual debates between people who know it better, if you look at, the debate that Peterson had with Zizek, you see that Peterson has no fucking clue, so it's like if you're arguing against a straw man, or somebody who doesn't have an idea, then it's easy to win the argument. But again, it's like when you put somebody like Joe Rogan, who is culturally more right wing, although he is like intellectually more, or he's like, he has like left wing values, but culturally he's kind of situated right of center. When you pair him up with somebody like Thaddeus Russell, who grew up in Berkeley and is well versed in postmodern theory, then Joe Rogan has no light in the debate.
Yeah, yeah.
You could see that, and so
Sure, yeah, sure, yeah, yeah. There's definitely there's something about the conservative values that shuts down everything that it doesn't. It becomes what it critiques, right? It becomes ideological possession. One of the best things about Peterson is his critique of ideological possession, and yet he's also ideologically possessed now.
yeah.
That's what it is. That's what he was really good at is describing the mechanisms of ideological possession, especially on the left. But he seems to have a blind spot to his own ideological possession.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe we're all like that to a certain degree, because we all have a certain perspective, and every perspective is limited because it's a perspective.
Yeah.
We can't like. There's this also the problem of let's hold all the perspectives, and then we can say nothing anymore about anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's always, again, it has something to maybe with strata and hierarchy, because I mean, I remember talking about Joe Rogan, and so he had a podcast where he talked about Barack Obama as a young idealistic kind of lawyer coming into office, with the idea to change everything, and then suddenly he finds himself in this situation where he's like in the upper echelon of power, and then in the first weeks of being in office, all the generals come in and to this office and lay down the law of how things actually work, and so suddenly his hands are bound, right? Because he suddenly is confronted with certain military and complex issues that he never thought about in that way before. So and so suddenly he is part of the military industrial complex in a way that the idealistic lawyer would have never thought so. And I think
exactly.
It's like,
yeah.
And I think that happens. It's like,
how could he not be? How could you not be if you have to be? If you're the head of the industrial military complex, how could you not be a part of it?
Right. And that's what I mean. It's like trigonometry guys. So suddenly they're at the highest strata of YouTube podcasts, like invited to make big speeches to industrials and everything. And of course they're playing their cards. They're talking their language. And so there's a disconnect between, catering to a kind of egregore, now, and when they're starting out just, trying to figure a way to trigger people, or to address trigger issues, which was more like a playful kind of thing to do. And so it's like, it's very interesting to me how that gradually shifts, so, and how much can you contend with the egregores or the collective unconscious that is out there, the collective narration of where we are within this culture war. And that's what I find interesting. you know.
Hmm.
So because it's
Hmm.
like, where do you want to be? Are you actually able to, to create a social field where you can create a new kind of narration or a new kind of egregore? How powerful is it? I mean, sorry to ramble on a little bit, but I'm translating this work from Ken Wilber now, The Religion of Tomorrow. He's a great writer still. It's a great theme, but Integral never was able to, you know, to really challenge these existing egregores in the kind of way that it's reaching out of its own bubble, let's say,
Well,
and
an
so,
egregore is a demon as well, right? You know.
right.
So is that to the credit of Integral, or is that a critique of Integral? It could be both. Could be the credit to Integral that it never got too big, that it was that it became a product, like an egregore.
Yeah,
Because I think an egregore is something to do with like a product. It becomes a product, something like something you can sell. If you have all the talking points of the egregore, then you can go out and if we were doing that, me and you, if we were like doing the same thing as trigonometry, and we're just like attacking, we're right in the culture war. We've got all the talking points down, and we're just selling that over and over again. Then
yeah,
then we could do well, but we'd probably lose our souls, right?
yeah.
But so maybe they didn't fully lose their souls. Maybe they have an effect that is implicit in the culture. That's not, because is success when you take over the culture? It's a good question. I mean, maybe it's failure when you actually become. Maybe success is failure, and failure is success, or something like that.
Right. Hmm.
Like the proper kind of failure is the real success. Like the fact that Integral failed might be a success because it had an influence, but it didn't succeed in becoming a. Well, it did a bit, but it didn't succeed in becoming a massive egregore, which would
I mean,
be
maybe,
a
okay.
demon, right? If you like the technical meaning of egregore. I mean, there is a neutral meaning as well, but there's a negative meaning to egregore. It's not a positive thing to an egregore, right?
Yeah, I don't know. The thing is that, I mean, maybe we're bound to our historical perspective and our historical view of our individual lives, basically. Because I mean, there was always, you can't think metamodernism without integral, and you can't think integral. And we talked about this ad nauseam. It's like you can't think integral without Timothy Leary, and you can't think, Timothy Leary without all the Gnostic kind of Hermetic orders that were there in the 19th century in England. And so you can go back to the cults of Mithras,
Yeah,
which were always, kind of outside, kind of the alchemic kind of back rooms, and temples that were always outside of the natural, the discourse of Christianity, and all of this. And so I feel like there's maybe uh always, maybe there was always this outside kind of perspective on the culture war, provided by people like Leary, Wilbur, going back to all the occult alchemical kind of people that have these outside kind of views. Maybe we don't just see it, that we're part of just a different tradition. That's what I want to say, of a different stream of cultural observation and cultural production. You get what I'm saying? It's just
yeah, I
like,
think so.
maybe it's not just the two demons, the two egregores, or the two things. Maybe there are three, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
Robert
So the
Anton
three
Wilson.
would be the two that are in conflict with each other
Right,
in the culture war or whatever,
right,
right? The left and the right, the the whatever, the two, the social versus the individual, or something like that. And then
yeah,
the third would be like, okay, questioning all of these perspectives,
right,
and saying, oh well, some of that is good, and maybe some of that is good, and but we don't want to be part of this,
right.
intense, very, very intense, um, polarized kind of dichotomous, thing. Like, we want to sort of have a more outsider view. I think you have to be an outsider a little bit.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. That's what the Mithras cult was.
Yeah,
It was like
yeah.
an outside cult outside of Christianity, with temples all around the Mediterranean area, which were sacred and secret, right? And so at least as far as I know, within the first century AD, there was actually like a kind of fight for dominance amongst this Mithraic and Christian kind of cults. And so the Christian kind of, because it could latch on to the Roman Empire, kind of had the infrastructure to settle down and be the dominant kind of form of observation of world and method and discourse. And the Mithras cult was going underground, like quite literally. But the tradition is still there. And I mean, if you want, and maybe that's the takeaway, that if you want to be really successful and have hundreds of thousands of YouTube subscribers, you have to be one of the two dominant kind of you be part of these kind of dominant discourses, either left or right or whatever you want to frame it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes and no. There's always the X factor thing that happens, right? Because I think that when the new guy comes in, when the new movement comes in, right, then that is something different. That is kind of like something that can't be, it's hard to understand, right? I mean, when there's any new invention, right? It's like when jazz music comes in, it's like, what the fuck is that? It doesn't belong to this. It doesn't belong to the popular forms. And then it becomes popular, and it becomes popularized, and it gets generic. It gets, but when it comes in, when it's fresh and when it's new, then it's like, and when it's a real inspired movement, then it isn't part of the culture war. It comes from outside.
Right. Mm.
I think that's like, I think it comes from the Provence. Like Rambo came from the Provence. He didn't come from Paris, or
Rambo or Rimbaud.
Rambo, yeah, Rambo. I live in France, so I can.
Rambo came out also.
Not Rainbow, not the rainbows.
No, Rambo, John Rambo, man.
Yeah. Did you ever go to a rainbow festival?
No, I didn't.
I did. Back in Canada in the 90s.
Okay.
A bunch of hippies in the woods beating on drums,
Yeah.
and taking all kinds of drugs and losing their children. Anyway, what was I saying? But I think that's very interesting. Like you say, oh yeah, you to get 1 million views, you have to be either one or the other. But you can't do that either. Like if you start to join on that, if you start to get on that bandwagon, there's already 100 guys doing it, so you can't do that either. Right? We couldn't just decide to be trigonometry, right? We couldn't decide to be that because that's already being done, and they're doing it, and they're not even aware that they're so caught up in the egregore. They're not in the liminal place. They're not self-conscious. They don't know what they're kind of like swept up by the thing. I think it feels like to me, despite their being intelligent people.
That's the whole point, though. That's the whole point that I'm trying to make, that the more successful and the more, so I mean, it's like this thing from the movie Unbreakable with Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, when at the end, when Mr. Glass says, now that we know who you are, because he's the superhero Bruce Willis. Now I know who I am, Mr. Glass, the demon. Right, the antagonist. And so it's good to know who, and I don't want to demonize them. It's like it's great what they're doing. They have massive success. They're super, competent. But it's also interesting to see that. I mean, they started around 2018. That's just 1 or 2 years, 3 years before Parallax started.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could trace their path very easily, so it's like from the beginning they were catering to, they were catering to a specific kind of audience, to a specific kind of topic. They were never, they would never approach Sloterdijk or Zizek or, these kind of people. They were always like kind of on the track to to Sam Harris and Weinstein and Peterson and all of these
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, and it was being sold. I remember when they first came out, it was being sold. These guys are the honest guys, right? Compared to everybody else who's, they're willing to have the difficult conversations when everybody else is too afraid to have them, and they're not part of the mainstream media. Uh-huh.
right.
But then they become the mainstream, right? In a sense. So there's a sort of like pseudo rebellion here. It's like they're supposed to be the brave champions of this particular point of view, but actually they're being swept up in the egregore.
Yeah, they have no, to be more personal. My personal issue is that I am no afraid. I have no. I'm not afraid to bite that hand that feeds me at the moment where I think I'm becoming too attached. So I love Wilbur. I love his work, but I'm very foul mouthed in the sense that I have no issues critiquing him or critiquing whatever. It's like because
Yeah.
I don't I think I have this millennial I think Gen Z kind of grunge
Mm.
grunge mentality that I don't want to be boxed in, and so I'm very individualist in this kind of sense. And that
Yeah.
and I know that the result of it is that I don't identify with any group basically, because it's
Yeah.
like I have
Me
my
neither.
friends and colleagues, and so that's an issue because like you know I love metamodernism, but I would never put the label on my forehead. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
So and
Totally. I feel exactly the same way. That's probably why we get along, I can't buy any of it, fully. I can't buy into it fully. I can't put the label on my forehead either. I don't want to. I don't know. In fact, I'd rather be kind of critical of it, appreciative of certain things, and then a critical of others, and that's fine. Maybe there's something alive there, and maybe most of it is shite.
yeah, the
Sorry.
integral community. I mean, again, I love the book that I'm translating, but it's just, I would never call myself like an integralist because it's like, why would I? It's like there's so many things that are interesting to me, like the metamodernism and Sloterdijk and everything, and complexity theory and Luhmann and Nietzsche and everything. Why would I call myself an integralist? Why would I
Why join
identify?
a cult?
Yeah, and so I
Yeah.
think in a way, if you're at least in these two egregores, you have to identify as a hard left winger, pro Palestinian kind of people, or you have to like you go like the right wing, traditional Petersonian kind of thing, and it's like no, I don't want that. I don't, it's like I can see, I try to see all
Yeah.
you get what I'm,
We
it's weird.
don't fit, Tom. We don't fit anywhere.
Yeah, yeah,
But that is the center, though. Really, actually, the not fitting. I think it's an ironic thing. Um,
but it's also our generation. It's like this Gen X. We are Gen X. No, I'm
that's an
born.
interesting thing to think about. Yeah, I was thinking about like what are the strengths of our generation and what are the strengths of the younger generation compared to us. Um, and in many ways, they're way more conformist, right? I think that the younger generations are very conformist.
Yeah, I
They're
agree.
afraid to say shit, and yet they're very articulate at the same time. So they're much more subject to they're much more media savvy, and they're much more smooth in their expression. Like
Yeah,
who was it that called the smooth? It was this philosopher Han. He was talking about the smooth, and that being sort of a dangerous thing.
can you
Yeah, but
elaborate on that?
then what then on the other hand there's a lot of maybe like what can we learn from these younger dudes that we're sort of have a blind spot to? That's another
Yeah,
kind of question. Like what do they have their finger on that we don't really understand? Because that's obvious got to be part of the case as well. Yeah, it's like the generation. It's not like the older generation is so wise, and they're just the younger generation are just a bunch of idiots. It's more like they should they're sort of, you could switch that around and put yourself, say, okay, we're kind of Generation Z. We're kind of, in many ways, we're kind of like about to be put out to pasture, right?
Yeah.
And then, so what is it that we can learn from these younger guys? And
Sure.
it's a good
That's
question.
that's why I need contact with young women, to show you what life is all about,
I see. That's
There you go.
that's
There you
why
go, Andrew.
it's a young woman. Yeah,
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 really.
young
No,
women.
but
Hey?
the point I'm trying to make
What
is,
do you learn from young women?
the point I'm trying to make is that, when I was 18, I just came out, culturally speaking, a phase where there was like a joyful individualism,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
the Doors and Velvet Underground, all these bands had just a resurgence, and you came out of this time, and then you went straight into the kind of cynical, ironic grunge kind of thing,
Yep.
and and that shaped me so much, so it's like, um I wouldn't even know how to identify with a certain movement. It's
Yeah.
I'm way too
Well, it's
cynical.
just, I remember the pre-internet world was so radically intimate with people, were so intimate with each other. Like in the artistic world, I was in Montreal, and there was all these things going on, all this music, and it was a really it was a radical scene. There was so much, like there were raves, and there was like country music festivals, and there were like, there's all kinds of experiment in art and stuff just before the internet took over, right?
Yeah,
But so there's something about that period was like, it's like if you were in touch with that, that something that the people that didn't have that don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Yeah. But on the other hand, maybe you're not as fluid with whatever it is the technological
no, obviously,
thing
obviously.
is trying to teach you.
No, obviously. So, I mean, I'm not saying that, the grunge era or my generation is in any shape or form better than, but it's different. But again, it's like to know, you know, again, now that we know who you are, I know who I am. And so, that discourse is important, and
Mhm.
so to understand, you know, who, who the trigonometry guys are, or podcasts like this, basically,
Are
it's,
they younger than we are? Are they
yeah,
like in
sure.
their,
They're both 40, I think.
they're probably not Generation X. Yeah. And and then Weinstein, the Weinsteins are obviously Generation X because they're so batshit crazy.
Yeah.
I think we need the craziness of Generation X. I think Generation X guys I think there's something like some sort of positive craziness about them.
Mm.
Like willing to not be slick and smooth and packaged, and
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
because
Yeah.
there's too much packaging these days of everything, and that is the egregore. It's just a big package, right? It's just a big,
Mm.
it's packaged humanity, packaged ideology, packaged behavior, packaged opinions.
Yeah. And I think there has to be like there has to be a place to come back to this, to just play with ideas, even, I mean, I'm fully aware that half of the shit I'm saying is just bullshit, but that's,
Mm.
you start Saturday with your course now, or what?
Oh, yeah, we're starting our course on Saturday
Mm.
with OG Rose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it goes along with what we've been talking about in terms of creativity. I think the course, that's really the theme of the course,
Yeah,
is breaking out of these egregores, unconscious sort of sleeping egregores of inadvertent ejaculation.
yeah,
Like he talks about intrinsic motivation, and like how the fact that, like, I guess I think a lot about what Gurdjieff said, that the human people are asleep, right?
Yeah,
And when people are asleep, they don't have any free will. They don't have any intrinsic motivation,
yeah,
and they just go along and they just create sort of, they just repeat, they just live in repetition.
right.
And breaking out of that is what's interesting. And breaking out
Yeah.
of that repetition, breaking out of that blind, that sleep, that blind sleepwalking state,
Blind determinism, yes. Hmm.
deterministic state is kind of what's interesting. It's kind of like, something's going on here. And so I think that that's what the course will be about.
Yeah, nice.
It's called Look at the Birds in the Air, How to Unplan Your Lives. And we're talking about how everything is speeding up in the world. And so it's hard to plan for anything
Yeah,
because everything is speeding up and intensifying. And so it's not a question, O.G. Rose would say, it's not a question of, or Daniel would say, and Daniel and Michelle, because O.G. Rose or Daniel and Michelle, it's not a question of planning. It's a question of preparation, being prepared for whatever, always being prepared,
I mean, did you listen? Did
but
you
not
listen to the
planning.
talk
I like that.
I had with Nora Bateson and Suzanne Kudreuter? Because I mean, this is like the overarching theme that we're like tackling at the moment.
Mm,
Because it's like you can think about, you know, the meta crisis or the meaning crisis or whatever, or you know, you look at the actual bird in the sky, or you take care of what's, you know, immediately before you, and you deal with the complexity there. And these are completely different approaches to life. And that's why I found, you know, this talk so, I mean, I was trying to take myself out of the conversation because I found it, I had like the whole list of questions that I wanted to ask, but by an invisible hand, you know, these two, let's call them matriarchs, you know, we're like kind of slowly diving into all these super interesting to me, you know, Nora
mm,
Bates, this systems theorist, and you know, and filmmaker, and Suzanne Kudreuter, these you know, academic ego development, you know, scientists, super interesting to me.
yeah, yeah.
And so,
Well, they're
and then
women, and the women are crying out, and be more embodied, guys. Come on, get it together. Be more like.
yeah,
There's something about that. That's the message I feel from the women.
yeah,
We can say that. I mean, people don't like making gender comments, but I think the women are just like, they're fed up with just relentless, you know, platitudes of abstractions and guys making up new systems of everything, and you know, creating these entirely sterile worlds of mere intellectual jargon psychobabble. So
yeah.
we're like, okay, have a look at your kids, have a look at, look at what's going on in your, in your, you know, in
Which is
your
interesting because like
garden.
our most successful videos are with the archetypal matriarchs. You know, that's the interesting thing. You know, it's like,
Mm,
you know, these were, you know, this is like these are voices that are not so prominent heard in the normative discourse of left and right. You know, these female archetypes as female matrix that walk, you know, as Alexander says, you know, always behind the tribe. So the patriarchs are always pushing forward, the matriarchs always integrating and bringing the fold back from behind, let's say. And it's
yeah,
like, you know, so and these voices are rarely heard or promoted because it's a different voice. It's a more deeper voice. It's a,
it's a
you know,
deeper voice and it's more hesitant, right?
yeah,
It's not so sure of itself. It's more in the right brain. It's more like emotive exploration, as not just, platonic ideals or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Um, and I think it's important. You could get lost there as well, right? You need both the
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
need both the elements. That could just become a zone of um, resentment or something. I don't know how to say that, but
No,
but
but there have to be, you know, it has to be an equilibrium in the discourse between those two voices. But just the highly rational, you know, abstract logical thinking, which is, we need this, but only to have this without, the deep grounding and deep experiential knowledge of constructing and leading the tribe. That's
Mm.
then it just falls apart, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
that is
that's why.
interesting that our most successful videos have been the matriarchs. Yeah. I wonder why
Yeah.
that is. Because we're two guys, right? You would think it would be the other way around. You think that, I mean, besides Alexander, Alexander Bard, but he's kind of a matriarch as well.
Yeah,
No, I'm just
that's what I
joking.
wanted to say. He's a matriarch as well.
He's he's not completely masculine in this
No,
personality. He's like he's always
he's
bringing everybody together,
yes.
and he's always like community, and
Yeah.
he's like he's like an old woman. I'm just kidding. Please don't be angry at me, Alexander. It's true, but
Yeah. No, but we have more things coming up while we're talking about courses. So our great historian, renegade historian Thaddeus Russell will do a one event course, like seminar on the politics of the Middle East, that is Israel and Palestine, and so
that would be
he will
that's a
bring
big
it.
uh-oh.
Yeah, he will. I hope he will bring like a very renegade perspective to that completely blows up the normal discourse that it's out there. So that will
Mhm.
happen at the 25th of November. So there will be announcement, and Greg Henriquez, the psychologist, will do a 4-week course on UTalk.
Mhm. Mhm.
February.
And then we
Uh,
have Luke Beckney is going to do a course on Gurdjieff on George Gurdjieff called The Hard Way.
yeah.
It's kind of anti-marketing. It's like, who wants to take that the hard way, right?
Mm,
Don't take this course. It's going
yeah.
to be horrible. It's going to
Mm,
it's going to it's going to teach you about your own suffering and things like that. So
mm,
stay away from this course by Luke Beckney on February 2nd.
yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah, suffering is somewhat important, I think. No?
Yeah, suffering is well, I guess it's like, well, he talks about conscious suffering versus just useless suffering.
Yeah.
So useless suffering is useless suffering, but conscious suffering is everything.
Yeah. All right, Andrew, I think we got it now.
All right, all right, Tom. Yeah. So you're just gonna cut out the part where